r/ask Reddit. Redditors who have hired a private investigator. What did you find out? My mother's dad walked out on mom, my aunt, and my grandmother when mom was just 5. A few years later, my grandmother died of a grand mal seizure. Mom was taken in by her grandparents, but she always wondered why her dad left and what became of him. In her 40s, she saved up a bit and hired a PI to track him down. Turns out he moved over time from Pittsburgh to California, where he wound up in prison for armed robbery and so other violent crimes. He died in San Quentin Penitentiary. I think mom got a lot of closure out of that. She was able to see that life would have most likely been even worse had he stayed, at least living with her grandparents. She was loved and raised to fulfill her potential. What happened to your grandpa is just sad. Luckily, your mom didn't have to live with him. Sometimes it's better that some secrets stay hidden. My grandmother's first boyfriend after my grandfather died said he was a retired cop and a veteran. They enjoyed dancing to country music together and bought a new car in her name though, even though she can't drive anymore. My uncles hired a PI. Turns out, that old bastard had a habit of shacking up with widows and bleeding them dry. The boyfriend, not the PI. Not me but my friend, also a lawyer like myself, was handling a contested will. Normally, very straightforward. Anyway, woman in her mid-30s, husband just died. He was in his late 70s or early 80s. Can't remember. Still nothing fishy because hey, nothing wrong with an adult transaction where a very good looking young woman sleeps with a rich old man in exchange for the use of his credit cards. Here's where it gets slightly concerning. 2 months before his death, he rewrote his will and left everything to her instead of his 5 kids. Around 35 meters in cash and assets. And then it gets downright thriller movie-ish. Turns out, the woman is a 5-time widow. Now you may be saying, sure, that could just be the unluckiest, most pitiful widow in the world. But it gets even fishier. In all 5 of her marriages, the wills were rewritten just months before their deaths. And every cause of death was natural causes despite not all of them being as old as the latest husband. And toxicology tests were not carried out during any of the 5 autopsies. But wait, there's more. It turned out that the widow was never home during any of the deaths, yet insisted the autopsies were carried out at the same institute. But wait, study I learned more. Widow is also distantly related to one of the higher ups at the institute. When I met my wife, she seemed to have a normal modern family. 2 moms, 2 dads. Over time it became apparent her stepdad wasn't around much. Holidays, birthdays, you name it. He'd pop in to say hi, grab a nap, whatever, then take off again. My wife's family thought this was normal, just the way it had always been since they were teenagers. He claimed to have a job following FedEx trucks around the state to prevent theft and drug trafficking. But I thought it strange and started making jokes about him having another family. Well, I guess it got my sister-in-law thinking because she gets a favor from the PI at her law firm. Sure enough, he has not 2 but 3 wives around the state, and 5 other children between them. My sister-in-law breaks the news to her mother, who immediately changes the locks and files for divorce. They never speak again. Cold turkey. Divorce is even uncontested. As a FU they also send the report to his other wives. That's disgusting. Also exhausting. My wife and I are friends with a lot of bar owners and bartenders because of her job. We knew this one owner/tender. We will call him Dana. That was the nicest ducking guy. Like, if he knew you were sick, he would cover your shift at your bar and then give you the tips he made that night. Just the best guy. Then one night we are drinking with another bartender friend, Ben. Ben lets us know that Dana has brain cancer. He's been keeping it quiet, but Ben has been giving him money, upwards of $5,000, for treatment. My wife and I were about to give money to Ben to pass on. Then Dana's business partner got suspicious and hired a PI to follow Dana on a day he took off for medical reasons. Turned out Dana spent the day drinking at another bar. No doctor visits. The business partner confront Dana, who comes clean. He did not have cancer. He was just saying that to get money from his friends. Apparently lots of bartenders had been giving him money. Dana is more or less run out of town. He moved to a different city, and I know he slowly paid Ben back. but it took a couple years. I'm not sure what happens to him since. My sister, mid-30s, is adopted and hired one to find her estranged biological father. They came back saying that not only was he still alive and nearby, but he had a daughter, meaning she also had a biological sibling. Further digging from the pie uncovered that they weren't just similar ages either. They were exactly the same age. The evidence suggested that my sister had a twin and her birth father had taken the twin and vanished. Huge, life-changing news. Eventually, through more incredible detective work, the pie realized that the daughter was actually just my sister. There was no other sibling and they had just been investigating my sister the whole time accidentally. Needless to say, we asked for the money back. Too long didn't read. Sister hired a private investigator. Private investigator accidentally investigated sister. Well, did you get the money back? I think we got some of it back. Yep, to be fair to the pie, they did find the guy with very little to go on before the farce started. To be more fair though, a few years later I found him again, myself, after an hour on the internet. My parents hired a private investigator to find out who my online BF was when I was 13. The pie came back and told us he was just a fat ass 13-year-old. Longfeo. When I was 14 my parents suspected that the woman I was talking to was much older than she said. I'd spoken to her brother and sister so I was confident she was who she said she was. I became friends with her older brother. I wish my parents had hired a pie based on their suspicions. Her older brother was her son. Her sister her daughter. The pictures she sent me were of her daughter. I was in my 20s before I found out. Hadn't heard from my mom since I was about 15. Very unstable due to drugs and alcohol etc. When I was 29 I decided it was time to find out what happened to her. I figured if she was a Gendo somewhere then I could put her to rest. And if she was alive then I wanted to let her know that I forgave her. Hired a pie to help. I guess she was moved by my story and so she also ran info for the man my mother was apparently married to on the house. And with one clue from his report I was able to track them down. I wouldn't have found my mom alive and was just starting out on recovery after being homeless and addicted for many years if it wasn't for the pie who kindly ran an extra report for free. Mom has remained sober now for about 7 years and is probably the healthiest she's ever been, physically and emotionally. So happy it got better for both of you. Not me but my grandfather did. He was separated from his brother when the Japanese occupied China. My grandfather safely made it to Hong Kong and eventually to Canada. His brother made it to Singapore or Malaysia according to family friends back then. So my grandfather spent a good 5 years or so working with a pie to find his brother so they can be reunited. Sadly, with just a picture and the fact many people died in the war, it wasn't much to go on. My grandfather is still alive and always thinks of his brother. It's his wish to see him one more time. Oh man, that's heartbreaking. Have you tried posting online do you recognize this man? With the image and a brief story? No. My grandpa is 84 this year. This happened when he was a little boy, maybe 7-9 years old. The reason why I'm giving ranges is because back then many people were so poor that they didn't keep track of birthdays. And my grandfather's dad had to make up a fake birthday for him when they arrived in HK. The brother is older by a few years. Not sure how much older because my grandpa doesn't really like to talk about him. The only picture my grandpa had is of them when they were kids. The pie had to rely on the picture, family last name, a few nicknames the brother had and word of mouth from other Chinese families from the same village. It's not surprising he wasn't successful in the search. My grandfather made several trips to Asia to do the search himself. I tried to stay in Europe doing this exact thing when I was younger, helping people track down relatives. Did it for myself. Figured I could do it for others. Sadly never got clients or knew how to market. One can dream. I know somebody who was like an assistant to the actual pie. She basically went to bingo with a camera in her purse to capture video of a woman. The woman claimed that a car accident had completely immobilized her, but she would take off the neck brace all the time, playing bingo hours on end. Nothing exciting, just capturing fraud. I was a private investigator for a little bit. Most work pies do is searching financial court records and serving documents. but one time I was paid by wealthy parents to stake out their college senior who had stopped returning their calls. They were worried about her. These parents paid like $40,000 for round-the-clock monitoring just to find out their daughter dropped out of school and was a full-time ski bum. BTW stakeouts are mostly just sitting in your car reading all day. I have always wondered, how do you pee discreetly on a stakeout? My law firm had a bad faith insurance case several years ago. A guy had gotten hurt at work. He claimed he was disabled because he hurt his back and could not lift anything or really engage in any type of physical activity. His disability insurance carrier failed to handle the claim and pay him what was owed. There was a potential for relatively large damages. In fact, the carrier filed in the court case what is known as an offer to confess judgment. It's a way of agreeing to let judgment be taken for that amount. The plaintiff can accept the offer or reject it. However, if he rejects the offer, he is responsible for the defendant's attorney's fees if the verdict ends up being less than the amount of the offer to confess judgment. The offer in this case was $750,000. He rejected the offer. A few weeks later, our PI found out that the plaintiff bowled every week. The PI got video of the plaintiff bowling and copies of his score sheets going several years back through the date of the accident. It was clear he really was not disabled. He also found that plaintiff had been in a car wreck and was making identical injury claims to the other driver's insurance carrier. We filed a motion with the court to dismiss the lawsuit based upon fraud and perjury. The court set the motion for a hearing. But before that happened, the plaintiff dismissed his lawsuit. So the guy turned down $750,000, only to get nothing. Less than nothing. He had to pay for their lawyers, every penny, plus his own. So long as the lawyers cost less than $750,000, those fees would likely include everything for the PI as well. So, in the end, he paid for a guy to catch him committing fraud. In his 20s, my so hired a PI to find out what had become of the childhood bully who had made his life hell and who had vowed to kill him. Actually, he did try by bringing a loaded gun to school, but some other kid ratted him out and the bully got expelled, but still lived in the neighborhood for a few more years and beat up my so every chance he got. The PI found the bully living in a town more than an hour outside the big city, in a dead-end job. He'd been arrested for assault and public drunkenness a couple times. That info helped my so get past his fear that the guy would find him someday and make good on his threat. I used to work for an insurance defense firm years ago. Best PI story I have is where we hired one to tail a guy who was suing our client for an injury that wasn't entirely our client's fault. The guy was refusing to settle and was insisting on going to trial even though we offered a fair sum that would have paid his medical bills. The PI we hired got some good pics that showed the plaintiff was nowhere near as injured as he claimed. But the crown jewel of the photos was one where the guy was walking on a pier with a woman who wasn't his wife. Had his hand on her ass and everything. Later in a deposition, the attorney slid the picture to the plaintiff and said something like Mr. Smith, obviously not his real name. Who is the woman in this picture? We would like to schedule a deposition with her as well. The guy went ghost white and told his attorney he wanted to settle. At least he was smart enough to realize that if his wife found out the other woman was gonna be deposed, he was gonna have to get a family law attorney as well, because the divorce papers would soon follow. Edit. Row. This blew up overnight. To clarify some points in the comments. No, this is not technically blackmail. Our firm had the PI follow him to see if he was faking his injuries, which is standard operating procedure. Not to see if he was cheating on his wife. We had no idea he was doing that. The fact the woman in the picture was his mistress was irrelevant. The attorney would have asked for the person's contact info even if she were just a friend, co-worker, cousin, or whatever. The attorney wanted to depose her to ascertain the extent of the guy's injuries. At no point did the attorney say drop the suit or wheel out your affair to your wife. So, did you settle or did he just drop the suit? At that point, I'd assume he just dropped the whole thing. My mom's best friend. She divorced her husband and was awarded full custody of their daughter. His family was a shit show. He kidnapped his daughter, and he and his parents just disappeared. This was easier in 1977 than it is now. She tried hiring a PI, but couldn't afford one. So she started learning how to trace people on her own. In the days before the internet, she spent years doing this whenever she wasn't waitressing. She did find her daughter in 81, but by this time her daughter was poisoned against her. Mom's friend went on to get her PI license and was a PI specializing in women's issues for the next 2 decades. I don't know what happened to her after that. If she's alive, she would be in her 80s I think. Edit. Thank you for the upvotes everyone. There's a couple of common questions that people are asking about this. Did mom and daughter reconcile? I asked my mother about that. She lost contact with her friend when mom left Texas over 20 years ago. The last she knew. No, they never reconciled. They communicated. That's it. What about the police? As I explained to another comment, it was different in the 70s. Unlike now, it was easy to assume a new identity and easy to get lost. It was hard to find people who didn't want to be found. The most popular method of assuming a new identity became a plot point in the 1986 movie Highlander. Police usually considered kidnapping by a spouse to be a civil matter to be handled by the courts. It was low priority for the police. Amber Alerts weren't a thing until 1986. Before there were just milk cartons with pictures of kids on them. Ugh. That must have been heartbreaking for her. I can't imagine my child being literally stolen from me and not knowing where they are for 4 years and not be able to get any help from the law. And when I finally found my child on my own merits, they want nothing to do with me because their head has been filled with lies. I wish she sued the hell out of that family. Had a babysitter we thought was stealing from us. Luckily our neighbor was a PI couple and they ran a background check for $10. Babysitter had a string of DUIs and a few days before a large fine was due, my camera disappeared. He also stole money from my kids' piggy banks. He sort of disappeared but was also really into Instagram, so I surreptitiously followed him. He started babysitting again for a single mom easy target and posted a lot of fun pics with this family. I tracked down the mom and sent her a long email detailing out his whole scam. She said we were right and it was clear he'd been stealing from her business. He has since gone underground, but I still Google him regularly to see what he's up to. He's been able to avoid arrests for a while now. Not a PI and haven't hired one, but I used to work in the office of a PI firm that specializes in insurance fraud. I would edit and sometimes write surveillance and background investigation reports that we passed along to our clients, mostly lawyers and insurance companies. One thing that never failed to surprise me, an astounding number of people who claim to suffer devastating disabilities regularly post pictures, videos of themselves running marathons and building decks in their yards. I'm comfortable saying that in at least half of the cases I handled over 2 years, our clients flagged their claimants as fraudulent because of social media. Disgruntled exes are another significant source of tips. To give an example of one of the more remarkable instances in which social media saved a case, it's summer, and on the day of surveillance, our investigator sees the claimant and his family loading their car with beach stuff. The claimant drives for a couple of hours before the investigator eventually loses sight of the vehicle. Side note: tailing someone in a vehicle without one, arousing suspicion or two, losing the vehicle is hard. The investigator, being way too far from his own home to drive home, checks into a motel. The next morning, he checks his phone and finds that the claimant checked in at a water park on Facebook. Investigator makes a pit stop to buy some swim trunks and a beach towel, drives to the water park, and gets hours of covert footage of the claimant swimming in a wave pool, going down water slides, picking up and putting down his kids, and generally doing a whole lot of things you probably shouldn't be able to do with a serious spine injury. Too long didn't read. If you're gonna commit insurance fraud, stay the hell off of social media. Haha, I like how you're included those expenses. Swimsuits etc. You should listen to some Johnny Dollar Pie radio shows from the 50s. Great stuff. His shows are told from the accounting of his expenses from a job. I never hired one, but my husband is a private investigator and owns a pie business. I have also helped with some surveillance. So, very often, you do not find anything. There isn't anything to find. You have clients wanting to catch their spouses cheating, but they really aren't doing anything. Sometimes, you realize that the client is mentally ill and very paranoid, so we can hook up cameras in the house, but no one is really moving the furniture around or stealing. I will tell you that if my husband really believes it's mental illness, He will not take the job or will cease the job once this is suspected. They need a psychiatrist, not a pie, and he's not cool with taking money from those people. He worked on a pretty high profile murder case. It involved several murders over a few years. My husband obviously knew a lot of inside stuff that never made it into the news. He found out a lot of interesting stuff there. He would read the web sleuths forum about the case and laugh at the armchair detectives. My aunt is one of those mentally ill clients who spent way too much money on these types of things because she was convinced people were living in her trees. It's very sad. On the other end of the pie spectrum, I was in a bad car accident 13 years ago. I was rear-ended at a red light by a lady going 45. Most of my injuries were soft tissue damage minus the TMJ. Fast forward 8 years. Finally had my court date to see if I'd get $90,000 in damages. They show camera footage from 4 years prior covering 3 whopping days of me pushing a grocery cart, carrying groceries and talking on the phone. Apparently that's enough to determine that you're fine. Present day. Every morning my hands go numb. It takes 3 days to clean one room. I can't braid my hair. Various other numerous tasks that take me way longer than any other normal 41-year-old. Sometimes you have to do things because you still want to feel normal, not like you're a 90-year-old woman. My best friend suffered a serious head injury a few years ago, and while she mostly functions pretty well at day-to-day tasks while she's doing them but no driving, needs noise-cancelling headphones, often loses her balance and wobbles about on the spot for a bit. She can't do more than a few hours of anything before she needs a rest. Even just being out for coffee and having a chat somewhere quiet and not too brightly lit just drains her. She gets headaches and exhaustion from screens, so she can't really study or work on computers, but she can say, watch a movie if she makes sure she has time for a nap afterwards, but there's no way she's watching a movie and then going to get groceries and making herself dinner all in the same afternoon. People's understanding of disability is too limited. I'm sorry that happened to you and that your capabilities were taken out of the context of your limitations like that. It was completely unfair and ignorant. My uncle was a private investigator. In high school my friends and I were getting flashed by a guy constantly. He would do thing like iron while naked at his window every time the bus dropped us off. I hated it, so told my uncle, who was very concerned this guy's behavior would escalate. So he started filming him doing it. Then went on a local news program to discuss it, and the guy moved out the next day. This makes me think of a story one of my husband's friends told us about a guy he knew. So this guy apparently had a problem with constant jerking off, and one day he was doing it in his car while driving. At a red light, a school bus with elementary aged children pulled up beside him. Not sure who called the cops, but he was arrested and is now a registered sex offender. Hopefully none of the kids actually saw anything. My work requires us to hire pies to investigate injury claims. We had this high schooler claiming a head injury so severe that he basically couldn't live a normal life. Specifically, he had an issue with bright lights, couldn't stare at a computer or TV long, etc. Our pie caught him on several occasions at the movies, arcade, basketball games, etc. So basically he was making a fraudulent claim. So not like Saul's brother then. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.